Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Your teacher, Miss Flip, asked me to go ahead and make a video about what it's like to be a scientist. Well, first and foremost, I'm going to introduce myself to you. My name is Chelsea Hawkins. I'm currently a high school health sciences teacher. I work in the CTE department, which is the Career and Technical Education. So my job is to actually take what the students learn in their biology courses and convert that to real world application. What is done every single day in pursuit of scientific interest and finding out more and fascinating things about the living organisms around us. Well, first off, I've got to make certain that I protect myself. You guys have been hearing about terms called PPE, personal protective equipment. Well, it's an everyday portion of my life as well. The most common type that I use is going to be a lab coat. This lab coat protects me from anything that I'm working on, and it also protects anything that I'm working on from me. Second thing that you see me wearing a lot is gloves. Now, depending upon what I have to do, I may also be wearing eye protection, my goggles, or a face shield to protect any liquids from bouncing up into my eyes or bouncing onto my skin, which may hurt me. Well, now that I've gotten that started, let's dive into what I actually do on a day-to-day basis. On a day-to-day basis, what I have to use for my students are models a lot of the time. So here is the model of an eye. This model of an eye would actually help my students understand how the eye works. Once we get done using those models, what I then am able to do is actually take an actual eye. So in this case, these are cow eyes. These cow eyes are actual eyes. What we tend to do a lot in my classes is dissect them. We dissect them so that my students can actually see the difference between a working model and what it is that it actually does and what it actually looks like. Scientists have to do that a lot, especially biologists like what I am. So here's a model of DNA. This model of DNA is helpful for us to understand its shape, how it would come apart, how it's utilized by the body in order to make proteins. And then what I can do is I can actually compare DNA. As a scientist, I get a chance to use equipment like this gel electrophoresis chamber. This chamber is what helps me to make gels. And you can ask Ms. Flip for a picture of what a gel would look like. I also get an opportunity to work with things like bacteria. This is bacteria that I cultured back in January. Well, it's still alive. I can still use it. Even in my classes, we manipulate those bacteria. We manipulate them in order to produce certain substances for us. We can actually see how we can change and make new products from hijacking them. We've learned what restriction enzymes are. Restriction enzymes are those things that are going to cut DNA. Well, we learned all about that thanks to bacteria. That's on a molecular level. So you've seen it on a structural level where I can actually take an organ and understand its form, its function. So that's referred to as anatomy, its form, and its physiology, how it works. One of the things that we also get a chance to do is study forensics. So in forensics, that's going to be taking a look at what's happened in the past and being able to dissect it and kind of see what actually took place. We can go backward in time, so to speak. So let's say that you find bones somewhere. A forensic scientist would be able to see these two pelvises, pelvis B and pelvis A, and see the difference. Would they belong to a man or a woman? What would you think? I'll go ahead and tell you. B would belong to a male. I know that because of this. It's called a sciatic arch. That's the anatomy. In a male, that arch is shaped much more like a pointed triangle. That angle of the arch is much more pronounced. You can also see that what we call the pelvic inlet is kind of narrow, versus in a female, that pelvic arch is much wider. You can see that that angle would be much greater. I also see that the opening there is much larger. I'd be able to tell that this would be a woman and this would be a man simply by looking at the pelvis. I'd be able to tell a lot by finding someone's skull. So you can see this one is marked B, and B was our male. Other ways that I can tell it's a male is by looking at this brow ridge. Women don't have that. Ours is much smoother. I can look at the back of the head. Back of the head, they've got a much more pronounced, this little portion on the occipital. It's got this portion here. That's because men have stronger muscles. I know that because of the physiology that I've studied before. If you've got big, strong muscles, you're going to need big, strong attachment points for them. And that's what that's for. I can tell whether or not the person had a certain ethnicity or not. Now, in the United States, it's getting more difficult simply because races mix quite a bit. And you get different type of features there within the bone. They've got a strong nasal bone here, that angle. That would be from someone who has a more European ancestry versus mine that is not as pronounced. I can tell whether or not the person had good dental care. Those dental records, everybody's is a little bit unique. That tells me whether or not the person had any care. Maybe they lost teeth. If you've had teeth pulled and they're permanent teeth, let's say that you got them pulled because of your braces, nobody else would have that dental pattern but you. So there are things that I get to do in my classroom. Now, what I also do, which you guys probably wouldn't know, is that I'm currently a student at UNC Charlotte. I'm getting what's called a doctorate. I'll have my doctorate in biology. What I study for my own research is environmental toxicology. That means that I look at the poisons that affect our environment and how they affect it. Well, a lot of that work has to do with microscopic molecules. So I study enzymes. I check to see, did this poison affect the way this enzyme works? To give you an idea of why enzymes are so important, normally your teacher might show this to you. Words that end in ACE tend to be enzymes. Enzymes have jobs to do, they have functions, and each one is extremely specific as to the job that it'll do. Well, if I'm studying a poison and this particular enzyme, let's say, is going to help you make ATP from glucose that you ate, well, if it can't do its job, you don't get any energy for your muscles, for your brain function, for any of your cells to work. I study how that poison might affect, not just affect that particular animal, but affect how it moves up the food chain. So little things like that is something that a scientist would do. We're also responsible for interpreting the data. Now, you guys may have heard a lot of times, and especially nowadays, when people don't really understand what scientists do, they love to sit there and say things like, oh, they don't know what they're talking about. They're just gonna change their minds tomorrow. That may be true. We do change our minds, but we change our minds based upon the data that we gather. If we find out something new, that changes how we think something's going to work. Let's take the coronavirus, for instance. Well, when it first came on the scene in late 2019, back in China, scientists began to study it. We called it a novel coronavirus, novel meaning new. We had never seen a coronavirus like this type before. So there's still a lot to learn from it. So do we have to change our minds about things? Yes. But remember, it's always based upon the data that we gather. Once we analyze it and gather even more, we work on what a hypothesis is. And you guys are familiar with that. You guys have probably heard it's an educated guess. Well, it's educated and it's not really a guess so much as far as a prediction. It's educated based upon, okay, we know this and this and this. Let's test to see if this will happen. To give you a good example of that, let's take toothpaste. You guys use that every day. Why do you use that particular toothpaste? What happens if you change that type of toothpaste? Could it be that, well, you guys have seen advertisements. This toothpaste will whiten your teeth even more. You'll go lighter by 3 shades. Well, they make that claim. Can you test it? Yes, a hypothesis is also testable. So when you test something like that, you may be using Crest, and it's Colgate that's being advertised that will whiten your teeth by 3 shades. Well, if you give it a certain amount of time, so if I use Colgate for 4 weeks, then my teeth will whiten by 3 shades. Okay, if I do that and I see that indeed my teeth have whitened by 3 shades, remember I could test it, I can report those results, and I can tell you if I say I think it will lighten my teeth, that's my hypothesis because they advertised it. Let's say the hypothesis wasn't supported. My teeth only whitened by 2 shades. Did that support my hypothesis? No, it refuted it. And that's okay. It's not that it's wrong, it's the fact that we tested it. And remember, that's what a scientist will do. We test. Now, me as a biologist, I work with living organisms. That could be animals, it could be their cells, but that's what we work with. So, understanding what a scientist does on a day to day basis, well, we have to read a lot because remember, it's an educated prediction. Well, in order to educate ourselves, we read tons of papers. And then once we get done with all of our experiments, we write a lot. So if your teacher is telling you that you've got to make certain to cite your sources, you've got to also make certain to watch your grammar and your spelling. They're doing it for a reason because whatever you test, you're going to tell me about. Well, I hope that explained a little bit more about what I do as a scientist, and I hope that you and Miss Flip have a wonderful day.